WrestleMania XL, Behind the Curtain, the documentary we've been waiting for a while now from WWE. It seems like it was originally supposed to come out right after WrestleMania 40. That didn't happen, and yet here we are now, a couple months later, and it has been released. And we can probably officially now call it the pivot that happened leading into WrestleMania 40 to get us to the Cody Rhodes versus Roman Reigns main event. So for all the people out there who had pivot in your office pool saying that this was not the original plan, you were correct based on what we learned in this documentary. And there were a lot of interesting things that we'll go through regarding some of the things that they discussed in this documentary to really tell us the full story. Probably not the full story, but at least the full story that they wanted to tell us when it comes to everything that happened with the build to WrestleMania 40, the infamous SmackDown segment where Cody Rhodes handed over his WrestleMania 40 spot to The Rock, and the fallout from there. That was the focus in the WrestleMania XL Behind the Curtain documentary. And I thought, initially, one of the first things you get here, and they kind of use this in the teaser trailer, and this is one of the reasons I think WWE has drastically changed for the better in terms of the creative. And that is, one of the first things Triple H says is he talks about how the WrestleMania 40 card was pretty much 80% done in October. Now, that's the way it used to be in WWE way back in the day. They would plan things out a little bit more long-term in detail. But then somewhere along the way, things got changed much shorter in terms of the time frame. You'd have stuff just being done on the fly. The stories wouldn't always connect. And I think that's what's making this work so well these days, why you're seeing ratings go up, why people are more interested, is because they are planning these things out months in advance. They know where they're going. Triple H kind of looks at, I think he said this was the exact quote, kind of looks at creative as a destination, right? The GPS gets you where you're going, but it's the destination. That's where if you know what that is, if you build from there, you can put all the steps in place to get you to the destination. The GPS will lead you there. And I think that was kind of an interesting, thought from him, because you think about how much this was sort of Triple H's decision, but then you look beyond it and you're like, well, it was, but there was also a big factor, and that was The Rock. And Triple H kind of talked about, initially as we led into the Royal Rumble, which of course we were talking about at the time, right? I mean, it felt like it was pretty clear. It was either going to be Cody Rhodes or CM Punk that won the Royal Rumble. That just made the most sense for the stories that they were going to tell. And, Cody ultimately wins the Rumble. Triple H talked about what that loss from WrestleMania 39 meant for Cody, and kind of a reheating year is sort of, I feel like, how they phrased it, where he comes off that loss. People already want the rematch. They're pissed off that Cody lost at WrestleMania 39, because remember, there was a lot of momentum, people thinking that he was going to win that match and dethrone Roman Reigns then. It didn't happen. We had to wait a year, but he talked about just, again, kind of heating him back up and, seeing how the fans were going to continue on. And, of course, they were reacting, and everybody did want to see that rematch. And we knew pretty early it felt like that was the direction they were going to go right after that initial loss. And so, The Rock enters the story here, and he brings up how, they almost had that Reigns match at WrestleMania 39. So we talk about the reaction to what happened at WrestleMania 39, where Cody did lose to Reigns, shocking to some people, thinking that was going to be kind of Cody's crowning moment. But Rock was saying, hey, we are, which he said before, too. It wasn't new to this documentary. He said this in other interviews. But like initially, the plan was they wanted to do that match at 39 between Rock and Reigns. And so, he even went as far as kind of to tease the WrestleMania 40 match whenever he went on the Pat McAfee show. That was during, also kind of in that era where he went on College Game Day, last college football season. And so he's adding in all the teases, right? And so they couldn't do it at 39. So Rock's thinking, all right, how do we get this to WrestleMania 40? So you've got two different stories being told in different ways, right? You've got the Triple H Cody, then you've got the Rock and Reigns. So you've got, it seems like, two people on different pages. And that kind of was how it all sort of came to a head here in terms of what happens. The Rock comes out on the day one edition of Raw, we all remember. And we all remember the 4 words that he said that set the internet ablaze as he brought up, head of the table. He said that phrase. That is where we knew at that time, if they are putting that in motion, okay, that's the day one edition of Raw. That's weeks before the Royal Rumble. And so we're thinking, all right, maybe they are going to get Rock and Reigns. But what's going to happen with Cody? Because Cody has been the person that has carried the company over the past little while. And so you're trying to figure out, how does Cody factor into this? And then, of course, the bigger development is that The Rock ends up joining the TKO board. in late January. So that happens, I feel like I don't remember the exact time frame. I know it's around the Rumble, or maybe it was after, right after. I don't remember the exact. Maybe it was before, actually, because we're going to get to maybe why it makes a little more sense. He's touring the WWE headquarters and all that, the new headquarters with Triple H and all that stuff. We get the footage and visuals of all that here. But then we do get kind of the conversation. And this was one of the parts that we didn't really know leading into this, because I don't know that Cody mentioned this in full detail in interviews that he's done. But Cody did, kind of bring up that Triple H mentions here that he had a conversation with Cody the afternoon of the Royal Rumble. And so if anybody's wondering why Cody cut that promo after the Royal Rumble on Raw, it's talking about how he had a challenging 48 hours and fans didn't know how much he really needed them that Saturday. This was why. Because Triple H did inform Cody the afternoon of the Royal Rumble that we were headed towards The Rock versus Roman Reigns at WrestleMania 40. And you kind of get the reaction from Cody here. And, Triple H was of the thinking that if Cody loses the Royal Rumble, it damages him. That was the exact quote from Triple H here. And that we sort of had to see Cody win the Rumble to see what the reaction would be. And we knew how it was going to go, right? If Cody won the Rumble back-to-back for the second time in a row here, one of only, 4 people to do that now. If he did that, it all but made it official that you were going to get the rematch that we had been waiting a year for with Cody and Roman Reigns at WrestleMania 40. And so you had the pointing and all that. And I know there have been the stuff, like on social media and everything, people are saying that Cody was never supposed to point at Reigns and all of this other stuff. I must have missed that part in this documentary because I didn't gather that. I gathered that this was kind of the plan, was, first of all, let me just tell you, WWE cameras are not going to shoot something that they don't feel like they should shoot, or not getting a direct sort of, instruction to shoot. And we remember what happened, right? It was Roman Reigns who's in his box, and you've got Paul Heyman up there, and they're looking at it. Reigns getting pissed because Cody's pointing at him and all this. We knew where it was headed. But, again, at the time, there was an understanding that we were probably not going to get that match, at least between those two. And Triple H made it clear that Cody was the only one who knew. And that was the only person he had talked to about this scenario, other than the obvious with The Rock, right? And his close associates, I'm sure. But Cody he knew going into the Rumble that even if he won, this was likely headed towards The Rock versus Roman Reigns. Now, what happens that changes things? Well, as we said, Cody cuts that promo talking about how things have been a challenge. Rollins interrupts, and so we have kind of the tease there that it could be Cody and Rollins. Rollins wants him to, challenge him, right? That was the promo after that. But what was kind of perhaps something that was pretty significant in this? That was the CM Punk injury. Because remember, CM Punk was supposed to face Seth Rollins. That was going to be one of the main events we got at WrestleMania 40. That was going to be your world title match. But we know Punk got injured. He's out of the equation. That didn't happen. So Triple H kind of brought that up in talking about, hey, that certainly impacted some things, because now you're in a situation where even before, right, if you were headed towards The Rock and Roman Reigns and you were headed towards CM Punk and Seth Rollins, then what in the hell was Cody going to do? And you think about that. Think about how just this change, and if it wouldn't have never happened. Now, the CM Punk injury gave you the out in that you could do Cody versus Rollins if that was the backup plan. But if you really think about all the things that happened in this version, the new version, the one that actually happened versus the one that was the original plan, it's such a huge difference in audience reaction, and you don't get so many of those memorable moments that happen along the way. And at WrestleMania 40, you don't get the Avengers assembling to get together and to take out, Roman Reigns to help Cody win. You don't get any of that kind of stuff. The final boss, you don't get that from The Rock. You don't get any of that. So it's a good thing they made these changes. But it is interesting to think about how the Punk injury factored into this and how it maybe made it a little bit more complicated, but also made it a little bit more easy to try to work in some ideas. And that is where we get the infamous segment from SmackDown where Cody does hand over that spot to The Rock. And he says he wants the title, but he doesn't want it at WrestleMania. When we all heard that, we're thinking, what on earth is this guy talking about? How could he say that, knowing that this has been his goal for 2 years now, longer than that? Since his return, though, specifically, that has been his goal. And so you have the stare down between Rock and Reigns. You've got, and they have the footage here of Cody sitting in the bus, and, the visual of Cody sitting in the bus, there's a bottle of vodka on the table. and he's just sitting there completely dejected. I would say if you want to watch this documentary, that's one of the I would say highlights, just because in terms of if you want the full emotion, that's one of the biggest parts of this, where you just see Cody, who is just completely he doesn't even know how to respond. He had just handed over his spot to The Rock, right? And so I thought what was, sort of interesting too, and Cody talked about how he was confident the fans would not forget him or they would not start to lose faith in him, right? And that was that very interesting moment where all of a sudden the backlash starts. You get the "We Want Cody" movement and all that, and even Triple H right after that, the SmackDown thing. Triple H, you get footage of him here saying, not sure where Cody goes next. Like, just not sure how this whole thing plays out. And I think that's so interesting because if you really think about it, that is where we had no idea at that point. What were they going to do? And again, like we said, the safe play would have been to put Cody versus Rollins, and that's your match. But it didn't happen. The "We Want Cody" movement happens. Triple H also points out something I think is very important to remember in the whole grand scheme of things here, is that it shows you how over that Cody Rhodes was for him to get that response from the fans. When you have The Rock coming back to do a Rock versus Roman Reigns match that people have been talking about for years, and yet people wanted Cody. They were that invested in the story. And I thought that was a great point, and sometimes we do forget that. This wasn't just Cody being wanted over, WWE's hand-picked guy that they were pushing and no one wanted him pushed and all that. It was The Rock. It was The Rock versus Roman Reigns. People wanted Cody over The Rock. Biggest blockbuster star, Hollywood star in the world. They wanted Cody. Because in professional wrestling, you want the story. And they wanted the story of Cody Rhodes and the quest for the WWE title. And I think that was what's such a big part of this, because it really is so important when you think about how we got there. And so if you want to know, based on what we learned here, who was the person that ultimately made the decision to change this, to go to the pivot? Who was the person that made the change? Well, based on what we learned here, it's The Rock, because The Rock says that he called Triple H, Nick Khan, and Ari Emanuel to suggest that the change happen because he basically didn't like the backlash. He didn't like the, we want Cody stuff. He didn't like the everything else that people were saying, right, coming out of that segment. We know it was hot coming out of that. And so then we get to Rock pivoting to using the Cody crybabies whenever he goes on the Pat McAfee show. He starts playing up the heel character. That leads to things escalating at the WrestleMania 40 kickoff. And by the way, that's still one of the best things I think WWE has ever done. I say that in all honesty, because that was such a unique setting to do the WrestleMania kickoff event. It felt like, and people have talked about, when you do the TKO merger and all that, it kind of feels like your UFC press conference, that kind of stuff, where you get the fighters, they're getting each other's faces, that sort of stuff. But this was something where, because you were changing course here, it was so important to get that moment. And they talked about the viral moment. We had to find one. It was The Rock slapping Cody Rhodes. And that sent The Rock into a different direction. It made official Cody versus Roman Reigns. You didn't know how Rollins tied in, but you knew he was there. You saw Rollins getting pissed off. You had all the pieces in place to lead us then to that tag team match, which Rock does say here that it was The Rock and Brian Gewirtz, former WWE head writer who has been, long time associate of The Rock, Seven Bucks Productions, all that. So we know Gewirtz has been working with The Rock and all this build and everything to WrestleMania 40. We knew that at the time. But he says they came up with the tag team match idea so that it plays into, doing that on night one, and then you automatically have something that plays into night two. Makes sense, right? So that was something that they came up with. And so we kind of see the footage of them shooting the WrestleMania 40 trailer. You've got all four there. Rollins brings up a good point here. He's talking about the egos involved and all that. And, talking about having these guys and the egos in the same room. And he's got a good point, because you think about how much has changed for all these guys in the build to WrestleMania 40. And so, again, we talk about kind of the tag team match being added to it. The Rock goes into talking about the Final Boss character, creating that. You've got Rollins rehabbing the injury. Rock's changing his entrance. They show kind of the behind-the-scenes stuff of Rock getting his entrance changed to really bring out the Final Boss and all this other stuff. Cody's getting emotional, talking about how much it meant for the fans to want him, like we said, over The Rock. Like, think about that. That is not something that many people can do. You had to have the perfect setup. This was the perfect setup for Cody Rhodes. And, I even go back to think about my initial thoughts of WrestleMania 39. I said I felt like it was such a huge missed opportunity when Cody lost to Roman Reigns right after WrestleMania 39. But when you think about it, every button they pushed after that worked because it got you invested in the rematch, and that's what people wanted, especially after Cody won the Rumble. They were not going to let it slip away this time. We had to get the story fulfilled. It had to happen this year. Not even The Rock could come in and change that. And so, Rock talks about how the most important thing here was that, that this character matters to the fans, talking about the Final Boss character and all that. So from then on, you really just get the highlights of everything coming together at WrestleMania 40. You get some of the match highlights and all that. And, just the visuals, I think, are something really to keep in mind here. When you go back and watch this, and especially this will tie into what we're going to see moving forward, because you think about kind of the lasting visuals we got at WrestleMania 40. The one for Roman Reigns is him and Paul Heyman hugging on the stage. Now, we know what that could mean, because I'm going to give you guys another video soon about how I think Roman Reigns is going to return. But that's the lasting visual you get of Roman Reigns coming out of WrestleMania 40. We haven't seen him again since. The Cody visual, and something they specifically, kind of spotlighted here, was that Cody's being carried by Jey Uso and Sami Zayn. And I think that's something that will play into a future story that we're about to get in WWE. And then, of course, they also, at the very end of this documentary, teased the next, installment of the Rock, the Final Boss, versus Cody Rhodes. And so that at least leads you to believe that if that's still the thought, that they're going to get Rock versus Cody at WrestleMania 41, they sure finished the documentary making you think that was the direction they're going in. Although, I think there's a lot of reasons you could do The Rock versus Roman Reigns, but we'll talk about that in a separate video. What did we learn from this? What were the big reveals? As I said, I think it was seeing kind of Triple H go in detail about that meeting he had with Cody the afternoon of the Royal Rumble. It was the reveal that The Rock was the one who decided to make this pivot, and whether you believe that or not, here's what I'll say. At least it happened. I don't care who decided to make the pivot, because if they would have went full steam ahead, which I am telling you right now, had this been 2 years earlier, 3 years earlier, 5 years earlier, 10 years earlier, they would have went full steam ahead. There would have been no change. But the fact that you have this new regime and all parties came to the realization that this was the best way forward, I don't care who gets the credit, because it worked, and it was a perfect way, as we said, to really move things in the direction it needed to move in. And now you've still got all this storyline material, because like I mentioned, think about it. If you do The Rock versus Roman Reigns, would we have beaten Roman Reigns? If so, where would things have gone then? If Reigns had beaten The Rock, we'd still be in the same spot, perhaps, with the bloodline. You wouldn't have gotten OG bloodline versus new bloodline. You wouldn't have gotten Cody Rhodes coming out of this. I mentioned all the stuff leading up to it. You would have gotten the best version of The Rock, which is the heel Rock. You would have got this sort of, stubborn, let's move forward as a babyface Rock versus the heel Roman Reigns. And the fans would have, they would have turned on it. Let's call it what it is. The fans would have turned in the WrestleMania main event, which we've seen it happen before. This one, the fans would have turned. No matter how much, you believe that this was the match that felt bigger from the outside world. I think Triple H kind of mentions that. Maybe this was going to be bigger for the outside world. Maybe. And he said it multiple times to kind of make you think, maybe, but we'll see. Even if you thought that, you would have been at WrestleMania 40. The hardcore fans would have just not been thrilled with this outcome. And I think it would have not been good. I don't think business would have been fine. People would have bought the show. They would have went to the show. Would have been a record-setting WrestleMania still probably. But I think what you got coming out of it gives WWE, it just gave WWE so much more to work with. And so, yes, there was a pivot, and could they still be blurring the lines between kayfabe and everything else right now in this documentary? Sure. Is everything 100% truthful in this? And some of it's not playing into our, the storyline maybe moving forward, perhaps. But I do think we at least got some clarity on what actually happened leading into WrestleMania 40. I thought it was a good documentary. Like I said earlier, if you came into this thinking there was a pivot, I don't know how much this would change your opinion. I don't know if there was a lot of new information in this that we didn't already probably suspect or kind of know maybe from other interviews that have happened, but to actually see it in real time, to see Cody's reaction after the segment on SmackDown, where he's just handed over his spot to The Rock, to see Cody's reaction, the Royal Rumble, like knowing that he's going in, already knowing that even if he wins this thing, he's not getting his rematch against Roman Reigns. All of those things, like that's what WWE does best. It gives you the emotion. Give me the emotion behind what these people are feeling. You get that here, and I think that was something that's worth the 1 hour. It's worth watching just for that reason, to get the emotions in real time as this is happening, and how Triple H ultimately got this thing where it needed to go. And so, credit where credit's due. It was not just one person, I don't think, that made all this happen. I think it was a collaborative effort, and good thing it was, because this was the way it needed to happen. And as we said, it gives them a lot more fuel moving forward. You've got multiple WrestleMania main events now coming out of what happened in the build to WrestleMania 40. As we mentioned, you've got The Rock versus Cody. You've got The Rock versus Reigns. There are other installments in there probably somewhere. But you came out of this with many more future main events that will sell and potentially make the next WrestleMania the biggest ever, and then the next one the biggest ever. That's what you wanted. So, bravo to all parties involved for getting it right. They didn't get it right initially. The original plan was not the right way to go. But they got it right in the end, and that's all that matters. So, if you guys watched it, let me know your thoughts on WrestleMania XL Behind the Curtain. What did you think of the documentary? If you haven't watched it, let me know what you're most interested in coming out of this. What you've heard here. What kind of intrigues you the most? What makes you want to watch it now moving forward? And be sure to share your thoughts on everything that happened on the road to WrestleMania 40 and how things have kind of evolved since then. But always appreciate you guys watching. Be sure to subscribe, hit the like button as well, and let me know your thoughts on WrestleMania XL Behind the Curtain.